Captain Han Wu stood in the command center of the massive human spaceship called Earth Hope, watching the alien message play again on the big screen. The ship had traveled for 3 long years through deep space to reach this moment, and now everything was falling apart right in front of his eyes. The holographic display showed 12 different alien creatures from across the galaxy, all sitting in a huge council chamber that looked like it was made of crystal and metal. Their strange forms moved and shifted as they spoke, but their message was clear and cruel. They were rejecting humanity completely. Lieutenant Yun sat at her communication station, feeling sick as she watched the alien leaders mock her species. The main speaker was a tall creature called a Valoran with skin that looked like living diamond. Her voice was cold and sharp as ice when she delivered the final judgment. Your species called humans are too primitive and too violent for our civilized galaxy. You fight wars, you show emotions, you create chaos everywhere you go. We have studied your history and we see only barbarism and destruction. You are not ready to join the peaceful species of the Galactic Federation. The other aliens nodded their strange heads. In agreement, a giant insect creature that looked like a walking tree made of metal clicked its mandibles loudly. This was the Cathari ambassador, and his words were even worse than the Valorantians are barely more intelligent than the simple animals we keep as pets on our worlds. They make noise, they call music that hurts our hearing organs. They create pictures and sculptures that show no understanding of true art. They write stories full of violence and primitive emotions. More alien voices joined in creating a chorus of rejection. A slug-like creature covered in purple slime spoke about human technology being thousands of years behind galactic standards. A floating ball of energy complained about human mathematics being too simple. A robot-like being said human philosophy was childish nonsense. Commander Jae-min stood next to his captain, watching the whole terrible scene unfold. He had spent his entire life preparing for this moment when humanity would finally meet other intelligent life forms in the universe. Instead of the wonderful greeting he had imagined, this was turning into the worst day of his life. The Alien Council continued their harsh judgment for over 30 minutes. They criticized everything about human civilization, from the way people dressed to the way they organized their governments. They said human music sounded like random noise, human art looked like the scratches a child might make on a wall, human writing was full of dangerous ideas about individual freedom and personal choice. What made it even worse was how the aliens laughed at humanity. Their different species made different sounds, but somehow it was clear they were all laughing together. Some made high-pitched whistling sounds, others created deep rumbling noises like thunder. A few flashed lights and patterns that obviously meant they found humans amusing in a very bad way. The Valoran leader continued, speaking with obvious disgust in her voice. You humans value things we eliminated from our societies long ago. You celebrate chaos when we prefer order. You encourage individual thinking when we know group harmony is superior. You show emotions openly when any advanced species learns to control such primitive responses. A new alien appeared on the screen. This one looked like a walking flower with too many eyes scattered across its petals. It spoke in a voice that sounded like wind chimes. We have achieved perfect peace in our galaxy by removing unpredictable elements. Human presence would contaminate our carefully balanced civilization. The insect creature spoke again, clicking its metal mandibles loudly. Your species shows all the warning signs of a destructive force. You wage wars against your own kind. You compete instead of cooperating. You create new things instead of perfecting what already exists. You are exactly the type of species we formed this federation to keep out. Captain Han Wu felt his hands shake with anger as he listened to these creatures dismiss everything humanity had ever accomplished. They saw human creativity as chaos, human passion as primitive weakness, human independence as dangerous instability. Everything that made humans special was being used as evidence that they did not deserve to exist among the stars. Lieutenant Yun looked at her instruments showing the vast distances between stars and realized how alone humanity truly was. The nearest Federation world was hundreds of light years away. These aliens controlled most of the habitable planets in the galaxy, and now they were telling humans to stay trapped in their own solar system forever. The slug creature spoke again with its wet, horrible voice. We strongly advise your species to remain within your single star system until you evolve beyond your current barbaric state, perhaps in a few thousand years. You might develop enough to deserve our attention again, but we doubt this will happen. Commander Jamin watched his captain's face grow darker with each insult. The crew had worked so hard to make this moment perfect. They had prepared gifts of human art and music, samples of human food, recordings of human poetry and philosophy. All of it was being rejected and mocked by creatures who thought they were better than humanity. The final insult came from a new alien that looked like a collection of floating crystals. Arranged in a vaguely humanoid shape, it spoke with a voice like breaking glass. We vote unanimously to deny humanity membership in the Galactic Federation. We also vote to establish a quarantine around your solar system to prevent your primitive influence from spreading to civilized worlds. The transmission ended with the sound of alien applause that seemed to go on forever. Captain Han-Wu stood in complete silence, watching the empty screen where the alien faces had been just moments before. Around him, his crew sat in shocked silence, processing what had just happened to their species. Lieutenant Yun-Young was the first to speak, her voice barely above a whisper. They studied us for years. They know everything about our history, our culture, our achievements, and they still think we are nothing more than violent animals. Commander Jamin slammed his fist against a control panel, making several crew members jump. They fear us, he said quietly but with growing intensity. They fear what we represent because we are everything they are not. They eliminated creativity from their societies and we create new things every day. They removed emotion and we feel everything deeply. They chose safety and we choose to explore and risk and grow. Captain Han-Wu turned away from the empty screen and looked at his crew. These brave humans had volunteered to travel across impossible distances to represent their entire species. They had dreamed of joining a galaxy-wide community of intelligent beings. Instead, they had been humiliated and rejected by creatures who valued conformity over innovation. The journey home would take 2 years, and during those long months something would change inside humanity. The rejection would not crush their spirit. Instead, it would forge them into something stronger, something the galaxy would eventually need desperately. Even though they did not know it, yet as the Earth Hope began its long journey back toward the small yellow star that was humanity's home, Captain Han-Wu made a decision that would echo through history. Humanity did not need the approval of aliens who had forgotten how to dream. They would prove their worth not with words but with actions. Not by begging for acceptance, but by becoming something the galaxy had never seen before. Dr. So-young stared at the massive holographic display showing data streams from monitoring stations spread across the outer edges of the solar system. 5 years had passed since the humiliating rejection by the Galactic Federation, and humanity had not wasted a single day sitting around feeling sorry for themselves. The transformation that had taken place was incredible to witness while the Federation continued their slow, careful expansion across the galaxy following the same boring patterns they had used for thousands of years. Humans had been busy becoming something completely different, something the aliens never expected. Captain Teho commanded one of the new human exploration ships that were now pushing deep into regions of space the Federation had marked as too dangerous or too worthless to bother with. His ship, the New Horizon, was crewed entirely by volunteers who had signed up for the most risky assignments possible. These brave humans were discovering habitable worlds and making contact with alien species the Federation had never even noticed. The human approach to these new relationships was totally different from everything the Federation did, where the galactic government maintained strict rules about how to talk to aliens and required months of paperwork before any real communication could happen. Humans simply walked up and started conversations. Commander Minay had developed translation systems that did not just convert words from one language to another, but actually captured the emotions and cultural meanings behind those words. This breakthrough allowed humans to form real friendships with alien species that the Federation had been talking to for centuries without ever really understanding them. Lieutenant Dongmin sat at his monitoring station on Mars, watching intercepted Federation communications with growing amusement. The same aliens who had dismissed humanity as too primitive to join their club were now filing official complaints about human interference in galactic affairs. They were actually accusing humans of corrupting lesser species with dangerous concepts. Like individual freedom and creative thinking, what really worried the Federation was how humans solved problems. When faced with challenges that had stopped galactic civilization for thousands of years, humans consistently found solutions that nobody else had ever thought of. They did not follow established procedures or accept that some problems were simply impossible to solve on Earth. Professor Kyung-soo led research teams that were revolutionizing everything from energy production to medical technology. Human scientists did not just study the universe like the aliens did, they questioned everything, challenged accepted facts, and refused to believe that anything was truly impossible. Their primitive curiosity was unlocking secrets that more advanced civilizations had given up on long ago. The Federation dismissal had accidentally created exactly what they feared most: a species that operated completely outside their control and achieved success through methods they could not understand or predict. Humanity was no longer asking to join their exclusive club, instead they were building something better. The new human colonies were unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Instead of the carefully planned sterile cities that Federation species preferred, human settlements were chaotic, vibrant places where different species mixed together. Freely, alien refugees who had been rejected by their own governments found welcome homes among humans who understood what it felt like to be dismissed as worthless. Dr. Hana studied reports from human exploration teams and marveled at what they were discovering. The galaxy was full of incredible wonders that the Federation had overlooked because they did not fit into neat categories. Human explorers were finding ancient ruins that contained technologies the civilized species had declared impossible. They were making contact with energy beings that Federation science said could not exist. They were discovering planets where the laws of physics worked differently than anyone thought possible. The Federation response to all this was typically bureaucratic. They formed committees to study the human problem. They wrote reports about the dangerous spread of human influence. They held meetings to discuss what should be done about species that refused to follow galactic norms, but they could not actually do anything to stop humanity because humans were not breaking any laws. They were simply succeeding where Federation methods had failed. Captain Wu Jin received regular intelligence reports about Federation activities, and he could see how worried they were. Becoming human trade networks were growing faster than anyone had predicted. Human technology was advancing in directions that made Federation scientists nervous. Human colonies were attracting aliens from across a galaxy who were tired of living under rigid Federation rules. The most disturbing thing for the Federation was how happy these alien refugees seemed to be under human protection. Species that had lived under strict government control for thousands of years were discovering what it felt like to make their own choices, to express their own ideas, to create art and music that came from their hearts, instead of from approved templates. Lieutenant Young-sil monitored communications between Federation worlds and noticed a pattern. The aliens were starting to ask questions they had never asked before. Why were human colonies so successful when they violated every established rule about proper civilization? Why were primitive humans solving problems that advanced species could not handle? Why were less developed species choosing to live with humans instead of seeking Federation membership? These questions had no good answers, at least no answers that Federation leaders wanted to hear. The truth was that humanity's success came from exactly the traits the aliens had rejected. Human unpredictability allowed them to find solutions that logical minds missed. Human emotionality helped them form deeper connections with other species. Human chaos created opportunities that ordered societies could never imagine. As the years passed, the contrast between human and Federation territories became more and more obvious. Human space was full of activity, innovation, and growth. Federation space remained stable, predictable, and increasingly stagnant. The civilized galaxy had achieved perfect order by eliminating everything that made life interesting. Commander Seok-min compiled reports that showed just how much the balance of power was shifting. Human influence was spreading not through conquest or intimidation, but through simple attraction. Other species wanted what humans had: the freedom to be themselves, to try new things, to fail and try again without being punished for not following established procedures. The Federation had rejected humanity for being too primitive, too emotional, too chaotic. But those same qualities were proving to be exactly what the galaxy needed to grow and change. The aliens who had dismissed humans as barely intelligent animals were slowly realizing that they had made the biggest mistake in galactic history in the Outer Rim territories, where Federation control was weakest. Entire star systems were quietly switching their allegiance to human protection. They were not rebelling against galactic government, they were simply choosing a better alternative. The primitive humans who had been deemed unworthy of civilization were becoming the most popular leaders the galaxy had ever known. Admiral Young Ho was reviewing reports from human colonies in the outer territories when the first emergency transmission arrived. The message was fragmentary, broken up by interference and filled with static, but the basic facts were terrifying. Entire Federation colonies were disappearing without any warning or explanation. The enemy called themselves the Devourers, though nobody knew if that was their real name or just what their actions suggested. They appeared without warning, consumed everything living on inhabited worlds and left behind only empty metallic husks where thriving civilizations had existed. Just days before, Derhana studied the few images that survived from automated monitoring stations and felt sick looking at what she saw. The Devourer ships were massive organic-looking constructs that seemed to grow rather than be built. They moved through space like living creatures, stretching and contracting as they traveled. Most terrifying of all, they showed no interest in communication, negotiation, or anything except complete consumption of every life form they encountered. The Federation response was exactly what humanity had come to expect from them. They formed committees to study the threat they held, meetings to discuss proper procedures. They sent diplomatic messages asking the Devourers to explain their intentions. All of this happened while entire solar systems went silent and billions of beings died. Captain Jinwoo commanded one of humanity most advanced battleships, and he watched the Federation bureaucratic response with growing frustration. The same aliens who had rejected humanity for being too primitive were now paralyzed by their own sophistication. They could not imagine an enemy that operated outside their established rules for civilized behavior. The first direct encounter happened when a human exploration ship stumbled across a Devourer fleet attacking a Cathari. Research Station Commander Subin made a decision that would have been unthinkable to any Federation officer. She attacked immediately without waiting for orders or permission or detailed battle plans. Her ship was designed with human flexibility in mind and managed to damage 3 Devourer vessels before being forced to retreat. The aftermath of this battle revealed something crucial about the enemy. The Devourers, despite their overwhelming power, had been surprised by human tactics. They had absorbed the knowledge and experience of dozens of different species, learning their predictable strategies and conventional weapons, but humans fought differently than anyone else in the galaxy. Lieutenant Sangmin analyzed the battle recordings and discovered something that gave him hope. Human unpredictability was more than just an advantage against the Devourers, it was a weapon they could not easily counter. Every other species they had encountered fought according to established military doctrines that had been refined over centuries. Humans fought like humans, creatively, emotionally, and with a willingness to try solutions that seemed completely impossible. Devourers adapted to every conventional tactic. Within hours of encountering it, they learned how Federation weapons worked and developed countermeasures. They studied alien battle formations and found ways to break them. They absorbed the memories and knowledge of every species they consumed, making them stronger and smarter with each victory. But human tactics could not be easily absorbed because they came from a way of thinking that the Devourers had never encountered. Humans did not follow logical patterns in battle. They made decisions based on intuition, emotion, and creative inspiration. They tried strategies that violated every principle of military science and somehow made them work. Commander Young received intelligence reports showing the scope of the disaster spreading across Federation space. The Devourers were not just consuming individual worlds, they were systematically destroying the entire galactic civilization that had taken thousands of years to build. The perfectly ordered society that aliens had created was falling apart because it could not adapt to a completely new type of threat. The Federation military was designed to fight other civilized species that followed the same basic rules about warfare. They had weapons that worked against conventional defenses, tactics that succeeded against predictable enemy strategies. that assumed their opponents would behave logically. The Devourers broke all these assumptions. More disturbing reports arrived daily. The enemy was not just physically consuming their victims, they were somehow absorbing their knowledge and memories. This meant that with each world they destroyed, they became more intelligent and more capable. They were learning everything the Federation knew about technology, warfare, and civilization. Ram studied the psychological profiles of Federation species and realized why they were failing so badly against this threat. Their advanced civilizations had eliminated uncertainty, unpredictability, and chaos from their societies. They had created perfect order by removing everything that made life difficult or challenging. Now they faced an enemy that represented pure, uncontrolled chaos, and they had no idea how to respond. The irony was obvious to every human observer. The Federation had rejected humanity for being too chaotic, too unpredictable, too primitive. Now, those same traits were proving to be the only effective weapons against an enemy that had perfectly adapted to fight civilized opponents. As the Devourers continued their advance toward the galaxy core world's desperate Federation, leaders began to realize that their sophisticated weapons and advanced strategies were useless against an enemy that operated outside all known rules. The species they had dismissed as barbaric primitives might be the only ones capable of stopping a threat that was destroying everything they had built. Captain Na Young monitored the growing panic in Federation communications as alien leaders finally understood what they were facing. This was not a conventional war between civilized species. This was a battle between order and chaos, between predictability and creativity, between the safety of established rules and the dangerous power of unlimited possibility. The galaxy was about to discover whether their rejection of human chaos had doomed them all to extinction. Counselor Valrath of the mighty Valoran Empire stood before the emergency assembly of the Galactic Federation, her crystalline features dimmed with the weight of terrible defeat. 3 months had passed since the Federation had officially acknowledged the Devourer threat, and in that short time 47 worlds had fallen completely silent. The enemy advance seemed unstoppable, consuming ancient civilizations in a matter of days. The Devourers adapted to every defense strategy within hours, turning the Federation owned predictability against them. With each world they absorbed, the creatures became stronger, smarter, and more dangerous. Captain Wu Jin intercepted desperate Federation communications from his monitoring station and watched their careful military planning crumble into panic. Their sophisticated defense networks had failed catastrophically. The same technological superiority they had been so proud of was useless against an enemy that learned faster than they could adapt. The breaking point came when the Devourers reached Nexus Prime, the most heavily defended world in Federation space and the center of galactic government. Commander He Young monitored the battle from Humanity Deep Space Observation Post and watched in stunned silence as defenses that had protected the planet for over 1,000 years were overwhelmed in less than 6 hours. The legendary orbital defense platforms that could destroy entire fleets were turned into scrap metal within minutes. The planetary shields that had never been penetrated by any weapon were torn apart like tissue paper. The ground-based fortresses that housed the Federation most advanced military technology were consumed along with everything else. Ram analyzed the Federation military reports and found a pattern that explained their total failure. Their greatest strengths had somehow become fatal weaknesses. Their advanced artificial intelligence systems were too logical and predictable, making it easy for the Devourers to counter their moves. Their sophisticated weapons required complex activation sequences that the enemy learned to disrupt. Their perfectly organized societies could not adapt quickly enough when their established command structures were destroyed. Most damaging of all was the psychological impact on Federation species. These aliens had lived in peaceful, ordered societies for centuries. They simply could not understand an enemy that operated outside all rules of civilized behavior. They kept expecting the Devourers to show some rational motivation, to have some goal beyond pure consumption. This inability to accept true chaos left them helpless against each attack. Lieutenant Namsu decoded increasingly frantic Federation transmissions as their leadership realized the full scope of the disaster spreading across their territory. The same advanced civilizations that had dismissed humanity as primitive barbarians were falling, like children toys before an enemy that represented everything they had tried to eliminate from galactic society. The irony was lost on no human observer. The Federation had rejected humanity for being too chaotic, too unpredictable, too primitive. Now those exact traits were proving to be the only effective weapons against an enemy that had perfectly learned to fight civilized opponents. As reports continued to flood and the scope of the catastrophe became clear, the Devourers were not just randomly destroying worlds, they were systematically targeting the most important centers of Federation power. The enemy had absorbed enough knowledge to understand galactic civilization and was deliberately dismantling it piece by piece. Admiral Seok Jin gathered his senior staff to review the situation as the Federation collapse accelerated. The aliens who had once lectured humans about the importance of order and predictability were discovering what happened when those qualities became weaknesses instead of strengths. The most desperate transmissions were not coming from official Federation channels. Instead, they were personal messages from individual aliens who had somehow obtained human communication frequencies. These beings spoke of terror, of helplessness, of watching their entire way of life consumed by an enemy their advanced minds could not comprehend. A Valoran scientist transmitted a message that captured the Federation despair perfectly. We studied your species and found you lacking in civilization. Now our civilization is being destroyed and we do not know how to fight like barbarians. We eliminated chaos from our lives and now chaos is consuming everything we built. Similar messages arrived from across Federation space. Cathari engineers who had mocked human technology begged for help with problems their advanced systems could not solve. Crystalline philosophers who had dismissed human emotions as primitive sent pleas filled with raw terror. Energy beings who had considered themselves superior to all physical life forms cried out in desperation as their perfect order crumbled. The Federation military command structure was completely paralyzed. Their generals had been trained to fight other civilized armies using established tactics and conventional strategies. When faced with an enemy that broke every rule they had ever learned, they simply did not know what to do. Their sophisticated command systems were designed for predictable conflicts, not for battles against pure chaos. Dr. In-kyung studied the psychological profiles of Federation species and understood why they were failing so completely. These aliens had achieved their advanced civilizations by eliminating uncertainty, risk, and unpredictability from their societies. They had created perfect stability by removing everything that made life challenging or difficult. Now they faced the ultimate challenge and had no experience dealing with anything they could not control or understand. The Devourer advance continued relentlessly toward the galaxy core worlds, and with each victory the enemy grew more capable, more intelligent, and more unstoppable. The Federation had thought their advanced technology and superior organization made them the natural rulers of the galaxy. Instead, they were discovering that survival sometimes required the primitive barbarism they had been so eager to eliminate. As the crisis deepened, a new type of transmission began appearing on Federation communication networks. These were not the formal diplomatic messages that galactic government typically used. Instead, they were desperate personal pleas from aliens who were finally ready to admit that maybe, just maybe, the species they had rejected as too primitive might be their only hope for survival. Mighty Galactic Federation was about to learn that sometimes civilization needs a little barbarism to survive. The first official Federation delegation to visit humanity in 8 long years arrived, not in the gleaming diplomatic ships that were typical of galactic politics, but in battered refugee vessels crowded with survivors from worlds that no longer existed. Ambassador Zeftar, the same Cathari who had once compared humans to barely intelligent pets, now stood before the Human Defense Council with what could only be described as complete desperation. Captain Nayoung represented humanity military leadership and listened as the ambassador delivered a message that would have been unthinkable just months before. The mighty Galactic Federation was formally requesting military assistance from the species they had rejected as too primitive for civilized society. The Federation offer was incredible. They promised humanity full membership in their organization, access to all galactic technologies, and equal representation in the ruling council. In exchange, they wanted just one thing: human help against the Devourers. The same aliens who had once claimed humans were too barbaric to join their club were now offering everything they had previously said humanity could never handle. Commander Yansu studied the alien proposals with amazement. These were beings who had never faced a problem their advanced intelligence could not solve. Through careful analysis and established procedures, the Devourers represented something their refined minds literally could not process: an enemy that operated on pure instinct without logic, negotiation, or predictable patterns. Dr. Kyung analyzed the psychological reports about Federation species and saw the truth behind their desperation. These aliens had lived in perfectly ordered societies for so long that they had forgotten how to deal with uncertainty. They approached every problem by forming committees, studying data, and following procedures that had worked for thousands of years. When faced with an enemy that ignored all their rules, they were completely helpless. The human response surprised everyone, including many humans themselves. Rather than demanding apologies for the years of insults or gloating over the Federation humiliation, humanity chose practical cooperation. Of a wounded pride captain, Hyuk Jae spoke for the Defense Council when he accepted the alliance, but with conditions that reflected everything humans had learned about galactic politics. Humanity would lead the combined military effort with complete authority to use unconventional tactics without interference from Federation bureaucracy. Human commanders would have final decision-making power over all battle strategies, even when those strategies violated every principle of established galactic military doctrine. Most importantly, the Federation would officially recognize humanity's right to maintain relationships with any species they chose, regardless of Federation membership status. The process of integrating human and Federation forces revealed just how different their military cultures had become. Colonel Minho watched alien officers struggle with basic concepts like field improvisation and tactical flexibility. Federation training emphasized following detailed procedures and maintaining proper command hierarchies, while human military doctrine stressed adapting to changing situations and encouraging creative thinking at every level of command. Lieutenant Haeun Young served as a liaison officer between the two military systems and documented the culture shock experienced by both sides. Federation species were amazed by humanity's willingness to attempt strategies with uncertain outcomes. They could not understand how human commanders could make important decisions without consulting detailed manuals or waiting for approval from higher authorities. Human officers were equally frustrated by alien reluctance to change established plans, even when those plans had already proven completely ineffective against Devourer tactics. Federation commanders wanted detailed battle schedules that laid out every move in advance. Human leaders preferred to establish general objectives and then adapt their methods based on what actually happened during combat. The first joint military operations were complete disasters. Federation forces expected comprehensive battle plans with contingencies for every possible situation. Human forces expected to improvise solutions as problems developed. The two approaches were so incompatible that several early engagements ended with human and alien ships accidentally interfering with each other instead of cooperating against their common enemy. Training programs had to be developed to help the two military cultures work together. Federation officers attended classes on tactical flexibility and creative problem solving. Human commanders learned about the importance of maintaining communication and coordination in large-scale operations. It took weeks of intensive practice before joint units could function without constantly misunderstanding each other. Even after successful integration, the alliance remained fragile and filled with mutual confusion. Federation species still could not truly understand human methods. They appreciated the results, but remained baffled by the chaotic processes that achieved those results. Human leaders were equally puzzled by alien insistence on following procedures, even in situations where those procedures made no sense, but necessity forced cooperation, and slowly something unprecedented began to emerge: a truly integrated galactic defense force that combined Federation technological superiority and logistical capabilities with human creativity and adaptability. The result was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen: a military organization that could match Devourer unpredictability with its own. Flexible responses. Dr. So Young studied the combined fleet formations and marveled at what had been accomplished. Federation ships provided massive firepower, advanced sensors, and sophisticated communication systems. Human vessels contributed tactical innovation, rapid response capabilities, and most importantly, crews trained to think independently under pressure. The question that remained was whether this unlikely alliance could be perfected quickly enough to face an enemy that grew stronger and more intelligent with each passing day. The Devourers had consumed the knowledge of over 100 different species, and were now approaching the core worlds where the largest populations and most important resources were concentrated. Time was running out for both humanity and their former enemies. The species who had once rejected each other as incompatible would soon discover whether their combination of order and chaos, technology and creativity, predictability and innovation would be enough to save galactic civilization itself. The final battle began when deep space sensors detected the largest Devourer fleet ever assembled moving directly toward human-controlled territory. Admiral Moonseat, commanding the combined human and Federation forces, faced an enemy armada that had absorbed the knowledge and resources of more than 100 consumed worlds. The Devourer ships had grown so massive they resembled small planets rather than conventional spacecraft. Captain Chang Ho led the first wave of attacks using strategies that would have horrified every military academy in Federation space. Instead of maintaining neat formations and following predetermined battle plans, human ships scattered into seemingly random patterns, constantly changing tactics and weapon configurations. The Devourers had learned to counter every logical, predictable response they had encountered, but found themselves facing an enemy that refused to behave according to any known rules. Dr. Yunhua breakthrough discovery came from studying human emotional responses during combat situations. She found that the same unpredictability that made humans seem primitive to other species also made them nearly impossible for the Devourers to fully adapt to, where other species fought according to logical military principles. Humans fought with passion, creativity, and what could only be called inspired chaos. The turning point in the battle came when Commander Ji Yun made a decision that violated every basic principle of military strategy. She deliberately allowed her ship to be captured by a massive Devourer vessel, but instead of trying to escape or fight conventionally, she activated a feedback loop in her ship power systems that created an energy resonance pattern the Devourers had never encountered before. The resulting explosion did more than destroy the Devourer ship that had captured her. It created a cascade reaction that damaged several other enemy vessels and, more importantly, revealed a critical weakness in their organic technology. The Devourers had grown so large and interconnected that disrupting their energy patterns could cause system-wide failures. Lieutenant Sang Ho analyzed the battle data in real time and realized that humanity's greatest weapon was not any specific technology or tactical method. It was their fundamental willingness to sacrifice everything for victory, to attempt solutions so desperate and illogical that even the Devourers' accumulated knowledge from 100 species could not predict what humans would try next. The battle raged for 3 days, with human and Federation forces working together in ways that should have been impossible. Federation ships provided the technological superiority and massive firepower needed to damage Devourer vessels, while human crews provided the tactical unpredictability and creative problem-solving that kept the enemy constantly confused and off-balance. Human commanders made decisions that seemed completely insane to their Federation allies. Captain Wusung deliberately crashed his damaged ship into a Devourer vessel while his crew escaped in pods. Lieutenant Minho used his ship gravity generators to create artificial black holes that tore enemy formations apart. Commander Haijin programmed her vessel's computer systems to emit random electromagnetic patterns that confused Devourer sensors. The final victory came not through superior firepower or advanced technology, but through a strategy so uniquely human that it could only have been conceived by a species the galaxy had once dismissed as primitives. Colonel Taeyong proposed using the Federation's own desire for order against the Devourers by creating artificial chaos patterns that would confuse their adaptation mechanisms. The plan was brilliant in its simplicity. Human ships would create seemingly random battle formations that actually followed complex mathematical patterns based on human art, music, and poetry. The Devourers would try to analyze and counter these patterns, but every time they thought they understood the system, humans would shift to a completely different creative framework. Dr. So Young coordinated the implementation using translation algorithms that converted human emotional expressions into tactical commands. Federation ships received orders that told them to fight like they were dancing to music or painting pictures in space. The alien crews found these instructions completely baffling, but they followed them anyway because nothing else had worked against the Devourers. The psychological impact on the enemy was devastating. The Devourers had absorbed knowledge from hundreds of logical, predictable species, but they had never encountered anything like human creativity applied to warfare. They tried to counter symphony-based battle formations only to find themselves facing poetry-inspired tactics. They adapted to mathematical patterns based on human music only to discover their opponents had switched to strategies inspired by abstract art. Lieutenant Dong-Sik monitored Devourer communications during the final phase of the battle and detected something unprecedented in their signals: confusion. The enemy collective intelligence that had smoothly adapted to every previous challenge was struggling to process the constant stream of creative chaos that human forces were generating. The end came suddenly and completely. When the last Devourer ship fell silent, drifting powerless through space, the galaxy finally understood what they had almost lost by rejecting humanity. The same traits they had mocked as barbaric had saved civilizations that had existed for thousands of years. The chaos they had feared had proven to be the only force capable of defeating an enemy that fed on predictability and order. Admiral Moonsik stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the debris field that had once been the greatest threat the galaxy had ever known. Around him, human and Federation crews worked together to rescue survivors and begin the long process of rebuilding what had been destroyed. The victory celebrations that followed were unlike anything in galactic history. Federation species, who had spent centuries maintaining dignified composure, found themselves cheering and crying with joy. Human crews who had saved the galaxy were embraced by the same aliens who had once called them primitive barbarians. The emotional barriers that had separated the species for so long finally began to break down. Commander Jisoo received reports from across Federation space showing the scope of the transformation that was beginning. Planets that had been consumed by rigid bureaucracy were experimenting with human concepts like individual freedom and creative expression. Species that had eliminated emotion from their societies were learning to celebrate and mourn and feel passion for the first time in generations. Dr. Kyung-hee studied the psychological impact of the war on Federation species and found remarkable changes occurring. The trauma of nearly losing everything had forced these advanced civilizations to question their basic assumptions about order and chaos, about logic and emotion, about the value of predictability versus the power of creative thinking. The alliance that had been forged in desperation was evolving into something much deeper and more meaningful. Human concepts of friendship, cooperation, and mutual respect were spreading throughout Federation space, not through conquest or coercion, but through simple example. Other species were discovering that life could be richer and more fulfilling when it included the chaos and unpredictability they had spent so long trying to eliminate. Captain Na-young traveled to former Federation worlds and witnessed the changes taking place firsthand. Alien children were learning to play games that had no predetermined outcomes. Artists were creating works that expressed personal emotions rather than following approved templates. Scientists were pursuing research projects based on curiosity rather than practical applications. The transformation was not without difficulties. Many Federation species struggled to adapt to concepts that challenged everything they had believed about proper civilization. Some alien governments tried to maintain the old ways of rigid control and predictable order, but the example of human success and the memory of how close they had come to extinction made it impossible to return completely to the past. Lieutenant Young Wo compiled reports that showed how human influence was spreading through voluntary adoption rather than forced conversion. Species across the galaxy were choosing to embrace human values because they had seen what those values could accomplish, they wanted the creativity that had saved them, the emotional connections that made life meaningful, the freedom to explore and grow and become something new. The galaxy that emerged from the Devourer crisis was fundamentally different from the one that had rejected humanity 8 years earlier. The rigid hierarchies and predictable procedures that had once defined galactic civilization were giving way to something more flexible, more creative, and more alive. In the aftermath of victory, as Federation worlds began to rebuild and new alliances formed based on mutual respect rather than bureaucratic necessity, the relationship between humanity and the rest of the galaxy had been permanently transformed. No longer were humans the rejected primitives begging for acceptance, they were the proven protectors of galactic civilization, the species that had saved everyone when advanced technology and sophisticated organization had failed. The galaxy had learned, perhaps too late, that progress sometimes requires embracing the very chaos that ordered minds fear most. Humanity had not just earned their place among the stars, they had redefined what that place could mean for all species willing to grow and change and become something greater than they had ever imagined possible.